All righty. Hello, everyone. We're going to get started here in just a moment. My name is Josh, and I'm the CEO and founder here at Airplane. We are a developer platform for building internal UIs and workload automation all in one place. And fittingly, a lot of what we see customers use Airplane for involves upgrading the operational efficiency of their teams, whether across SaaS, fintech, or especially healthcare and health tech. So I'm very eager to dive into that topic today. I'm joined by Abel from Electronic Caregiver and Robert from AcuityMD. And thank you guys for taking the time today. And we'll be discussing internal tooling in the health tech space. So hopefully it'll be very informative and hopefully fun and interesting. Maybe to start things off, Abel and Robert, can you introduce yourselves a bit and tell us a little bit about your respective companies? And maybe Abel, we'll start with you.
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Abel Salcido. I'm the Deputy Chief Technology Officer for Electronic Caregiver. And my background is mechanical engineering with an interest in machine learning. At Electronic Caregiver, we are a provider of advanced telecare services that includes technology, including ProHealth, Premier services. These are all peripheral devices to be able to track your health as you go throughout the day.
Great.
Cool. Yeah, and I'm Robert Coe. I'm the CTO and co-founder at AcuityMD. So my background's in enterprise SaaS, and AcuityMD, we are a commercial platform for the medical device industry.
Awesome. And maybe to kick things off a bit, I'd be curious to learn a little bit about what each of your teams are currently actively working on. What are the big priorities here? And maybe just for fun, what's the most surprising thing you've seen in this intersection of technology and healthcare? Robert, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I can go. So yeah, I think the things we're really excited about building at AcuityMD is first off, is a world-class data product that helps medical device commercial teams go to market and bring novel medical technology to the end patient at the end of the day. That's our mission at AcuityMD, is to medical technology is rapidly accelerating in terms of what it can do for patients, but it's actually really difficult given the current state of the healthcare industry and just it's very hard to get these in the hands of doctors and helping patients at the end of the day. So some things that we're working on are more CRM functionality that's highly specific to the medical device industry, contract management, which is a critical part of any go-to-market for any medical technology or anyone selling to hospitals, for example. And yeah, so those are some of the and more data products around being able to analyze at a high level patient journeys and how that might affect go-to-market strategies. So one of the most surprising things for me has been kind of coming into the healthcare space over the last few years. You read all the time about technology companies many times thinking that they can solve healthcare with software. And one of the things that's surprising is that it's a very broad space is healthcare, and in any given single of the hundreds of different spaces, the complexity is very deep as well as the breadth. So in any area of problems that you're going to solve, there's historical nuance and a lot of complexity that you're going to continue to unearth as you continue to build more product. So it's been very surprising. All the things I mentioned that we're building are very, very nuanced, even within a specific industry like medtech.
And I'm curious, have you found specific focuses or niches within medtech? How does Acuity think of that?
Focuses or initiatives, as in what?
Like within all devices or all kinds of use cases or doctors. Are there specific sub verticals that you're focused on?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of really interesting things around case management and kind of implantables for orthopedics, especially, and some interesting problems that we're out to solve that are unique to the industry, that aren't focuses for general purpose software tools, or things like mobile usage because our users are always on the road, and things like offline because they might be in the basement of a hospital. So really, really interesting areas.
Very cool. Abel, how about you guys?
Sure. I'm currently working on our proprietary virtual caregiver. Think of a smart home health system. She's personable, she communicates with you, but what's great about her is that she kind of walks you through your day-to-day with your health. So if you're having to take medication or you need to take your vitals because that's part of your regimen that you have by your doctor, she will accompany you through that. But on the back end, with our platform that we have, it allows us to do or get insights based on the data metrics that we're ingesting. So that's the biggest thing that we're currently working on. The most surprising thing with healthcare and technology is just it's right around the corner where you're going to be able to use the data that we're collecting to augment the doctors or your nurses in regards to be able to provide healthcare. Because right now there's a shortage, even through COVID, we've noticed how bad it strained our hospitals, our healthcare overall. And so we're hoping that with technology, we're able to augment that. And so it's a little bit difficult. Some individuals are skeptical in regards to it because they think of a black box when it comes to data or machine learning or AI. But we're hoping that with discoveries and more documentation, then that becomes something that they adopt a lot easier.
Yeah, totally agree. And I'm sure we'll touch on that topic a little bit more throughout this call as well. Maybe let's move into the actual topic at hand here, and figured I'd start at a high level and sort of just talk about definitions a bit. So, I was just curious, how do you define operational efficiency in your businesses? How do you measure or define it, right? And how does it ultimately impact your business KPIs? Like, what is that series of connections to the ultimate business end goals? And also, sorry to add to the list of questions, but who owns this, right? Who's responsible for this at your org? Abel, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. When thinking of operational or operations within our team, I don't come with a strong point of view of what we'll need on our end. I try to rely on the expertise, right? So we have a team that we hired them for a reason. And so I allow them to bring in their ideas so we can bounce back and forth to make sure that it's a welcoming environment overall because we want them to grow. At the end of the day, I'm going to retire someday and I'm hoping my team can take my place. And so being able to allow them to grow and to make their own decisions, obviously within mind of what our end goal is, has been one of the biggest things that has helped us continue to bring in talent to our team.
Right. So you're saying everyone on your team is focused on the end business goals and they understand operational efficiency through that, essentially. Are there certain teams that in practice own this more, or is it really distributed across the whole business?
It's across the whole business. We're broken up into several teams within the group. Each one of us or each group has their own lead. But internally, we make sure that everybody participates. Because what we've noticed, if everyone is participating in the end goal for the company where we're going, then they feel more that they're adding more value to us. And so that overall just allows us to continue to bring or motivate them.
Right. If I were to ask you how well around operational efficiency, how well is your team doing, right? Like, how would you break down that question in terms of what are the signs you're looking for? What indicates success there? What indicates failure?
Yeah. So because of the operation, well, the way we look at it is we are a development team. So we usually have directives from our C-suite or stakeholders as to where the company should be going to. We usually have a product owner who sits down with them and they go through the story building of it. And there's metrics that we have like, hey, this is a successful story if we complete X, Y, and Z. And to us, being able to meet that where we deliver the product and we hit every single mark that our stakeholders want, to us is successful.
Robert, how does that compare with your org, right? How do you think about efficiency?
Yeah, so at AcuityMD, we're a young company. So I think the transition from a scrappy startup to a scaling business comes with a lot of attention to operational efficiency, whereas in the early days, you're focused on getting things off the ground, and that might be brute forcing things and not focusing on automation. And it's a simple part of scaling is how do you make your team more and more effective at their jobs. So how we define operational efficiency is really depends on the team and what their day-to-day job is, and how effectively are they able to do that, and just how happy are they doing that work as well, and how kind of satisfied they are in their roles, and are they feeling like they are contributing their best work to the mission of the company. So in terms of how we measure that, it's per team based on what those KPIs should be on how efficient they are and how effective they are. So things like, for example, the teams in the kind of customer support, the implementation side, that might be hours tracked, doing things that might be semi-repetitive that maybe we can automate away. On engineering, it's things that people are maybe 15 commands you might run in the terminal to do something that should probably just be one, or maybe even fully automated and on a schedule. So the ways we measure that are by tracking things like even hours and down to hours tracking internally, but then also like pulse surveys and developer happiness surveys of like, what is the most painful thing that you had to do? And if we just see the same thing pop up and up again, that's a great signal that we should invest in automation.
And that's an interesting point. That's not just time wasted, but also the toil aspect of it leads to likely lower morale, maybe higher team attrition. When this is like, I guess both like when this is working, when it's not working, right? How have you seen that tie into the ultimate business goals? Like, I'm curious if you've seen some examples so far.
Yeah, I think the things that we see are really we're laser focused on customers all the time, and customer value, and that's the real business impact that we have. So we try to link everything back up to that. So if our developers are more productive and more satisfied, they're going to ship better products to the customer. And we should have faster iteration cycles on the engineering and product organization. Yeah. On like implementation, that's right, that speed of getting people up and running, that's reducing any friction with people learning about our product and getting so the support they need, for example. So things like every kind of business metric that you should track, you should also be thinking about how can the things that our team is responsible for be more efficient.
And how does implementation speed play into like the customer journey? Is it an important aspect of it? Not really.
Yeah, I mean, in enterprise software, it's critical. The first kind of couple weeks of after you get onboarded are where the best first impressions are made. And it's one of the things that is just notoriously painful in enterprise software, and the bigger companies, that you might be stuck in a Salesforce implementation for 18 months. We see that all the time. So what we pride ourselves on is being as easy and seamless to get up and running to get the most value out of the contract you just signed. So yeah, there's sentiment, but then also measured in things like back and forths and time to live on the platform.
Interesting. And so there's obviously this natural desire, of course, for everyone to get high levels of operational efficiency. But then, especially in a space like health tech, right? There's natural opposing forces of, say, security, compliance. And so I'm curious how, those interact either favorably or not. Robert, maybe we'll start with you on this one, right? Especially given that you come from a non-health tech background years before this. How has this differed when moving to a more regulated industry, and how does that impact your teams?
Yeah, so coming from a non-health tech, but still enterprise, definitely saw security play a really big part in prior roles, but it's definitely a different place, because mainly the data that you're handling and the customers you're working with are just both more sensitive to security and compliance. So having that top of mind from day one, so things like SOC 2, being prepared for that from the very, very early days, and being considerate of that in pretty much everything that we build has been critical.
Yeah. I'm guessing SOC 2 is a lot easier to do early on than later.
So they say. Yeah, I think that's probably true. Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine putting all those controls in if you hadn't thought about it. If you're a 2,000 person company, for example, that's a lot of work.
Yeah. Do you run into issues where like do people tend to have access to the systems they need to do their job, right? Is that generally not an issue because of how things have been built out, or does that, add some friction to the process?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, that's a critical part of these standards is who has access to what, and is there a process in place? So being diligent about automating that from the very early days with single sign-on, employee groups, syncing those things all the way through our systems that have that sensitive data or
Right.
sensitive tooling or workflows has been crucial. And it's hard to do. It's hard to pay. It's hard to put that much effort into that, especially in the early days when you're just laser focused on the customer value. That's a trade-off that is hard for some people to make.
Yeah. If only there was a platform that solved that. Abel, I'm curious, from your perspective too, right? You've been in the space for a while now. How has it evolved? Has it changed, especially around security and compliance, right? What do you see the trends there?
On mine has been stricter regulations, especially with our company, where we're not only here local in the US, but we're also starting to venture outward outside of the country. And so there's multiple regulations that we have to follow. And so any of our enterprise solutions that we want to implement, we have to think about both of them or anywhere that we're thinking of heading for the future. So it is kind of a bottleneck because some of them conflict, some of them are great. But what we try to do is take the strictest one and follow that path.
Yeah, interesting. Well, what is the strictest one so far?
For me, at least overseas is Europe so far.
Yeah.
Because some of those smaller countries, like I believe Italy, you're only allowed to keep it within the data center within that country. And so data isn't allowed to flow out of there. So
Interesting.
yeah.
So does that end up having implications on the product and the operations of the teams? Like how deep do those regulations end up impacting your business?
Significant in regards to resources, at least monetary wise. It's a big impact on that end. The team itself, they're pretty agile, so they're able to comply as needed. But we always have to think of cost. Cost is what drives what we're going to implement.
Right. And I'm assuming you have to like take this into account throughout the whole process of product development, right? Even for a very agile team. Like how does that matrix into the process of building products? Is it something that you had to account for from the start only? Check in at the end?
No, it's constant. So it's from the beginning and it's continued throughout because policies change, governments change. And so there'll always be new regulations that we have to comply with. And so that's where we have our attorneys that come in, hey, something's changing. Here's the new regulations. Do we comply with it? And so we're always constantly monitoring and making sure that we comply.
Right. I guess I'm curious how net overall, like how much you would estimate that slows down. Yeah, right. Like you could wave away security requirements and compliance requirements. Like how much faster would your teams be able to move? And like where does the biggest slowdown come from?
Documentation and proper applications when they review.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah. At least currently on our team, that's where I've seen the slowdown. It's not the implementation and following the regulations, is going through that red tape that they need us to with the proper documentation to get clearance to start using the product.
I see.
That's where the slowdowns happen for us.
Cool. And maybe moving into it's a good segue into like tooling that you might be able to build or buy to support to counteract this bit of slowdown, right? I'm curious how you think about operationalizing various teams. Like how do you where do you place your investments, and how does security play into this as you're building? Maybe Abel, we'll start with you on this one.
Sure. So whenever we start thinking, we're a small team. I consider our company a startup, even though there's about 300 of us working for the company. So we're pretty much still a startup in the way of our development team. It's a small group. So our resources usually focus on our stakeholders' input based on where we're going to bring more value to it. Anything else within that is not going to be built into the current product line that we have. For example, if we're doing reports, if there's a tool that we can use as a third-party SaaS to implement and to allow us to move forward without having to waste resources or spinning up a different team, it's probably the method that we're going to employ currently within the company. And we still do. Because at the end of the day, we're looking where should we invest, and right now all of our investments have been in our internal platforms that we want to continue to grow so we can become, again, continue to be a leader in that space.
Interesting. So you're saying when there's like a build versus buy decision, or maybe at a platform level, building versus buying, you lean towards the buy, right? Like this is not our core competency. Maybe we should look externally for it.
Yes.
I'm sure that with a team of engineers, they're all saying, do you ever get pushback and say, hey, well, I could build this in a weekend? Like, what does that conversation look like?
We do get that constantly. Specifically from at least from right now, I see it from my front end developers. They're like, hey, I can do the UI for that. I'm like, great, but our main core business is data driven. So being able to have the connection, secure connections is where we want to focus on. And that's, we usually go back and forth. And what I do is normally break it up into the cost, the amount and effort that they're going to put in versus what we would pay. And usually when they see the differences, they're like, oh, well, it makes sense why you would want to pay for the service versus building it out yourself.
Yeah, that makes sense. Is security a concern when you're buying, right? Like, has that been especially a challenge given your space?
It's always a concern because we have to be HIPAA compliant. So any service that we use, that's our first question. Are you HIPAA compliant? Can we have a BAA in place or an agreement, a business agreement in place in order to do business? If those are not met, then we normally don't do business with the organization for that SaaS.
Right. Makes sense. Robert, similar question, right? Like, how do you think about tooling when it comes to supporting operational efficiency? I assume it's on a team by team basis, but what's a rough framework that you use for prioritizing investment?
Yeah, I think the framework, the general framework we have is again customer value first. So it's always hard to take a look at something that you might build for an internal use case, and those front end engineers, your full stack team, for example, pulling that attention away from delivering direct value. There's again that trade-off shows up again, but it's absolutely critical for our teams to be able to run the business. So there's a ton of leverage that we can provide to ourselves as an engineering organization, and then also our kind of peers throughout the organization. So things like, yeah, the things that we can automate, the things that we do over and over again, the bigger data asks, things that people are doing in spreadsheets that aren't probably good to do in spreadsheets. Those kind of things that we constantly take a look at and work with our other stakeholders across the business to say, hey, like, where are your pain points? How can we make you guys more effective?
Right. And you hinted at this earlier, right? I'm curious, like, how formalized is that? Is there like a sprint meeting every 2 weeks where you talk about tooling, or is it like, how formalized is that process of determining investments?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think we kind of have two prongs of it, which is on the product side is like doing a very regular review with the customer success, the sales, the consulting teams, and support to kind of always be highlighting like what's really slowing you guys down and where can we help. And that's prioritized from a product point of view. And then I also do personal check-ins with other stakeholders to learn more about what these pain points are and see if there are kind of quick wins that are from a more technical point of view that might might not even need a huge product scoping. Maybe it's just this like one bug that's like not really hitting our customers and not getting noticed, but it's hitting this team all the time.
Yeah.
And it kind of falls at the bottom of the priority list because it's an internal pain point.
Interesting. So those don't tend to get service otherwise, right? Because you're looking at external product managers or product stakeholders, and you're trying to prioritize against that. That's really interesting. I guess I'm curious in your experience so far at Acuity, how often are these small little fixes, right? How often does the team partake like a major effort, and what did that, if there was a major effort, what did that look like?
Yeah, I think we try to be agile and do things incrementally. So I think it's kind of building small MVPs to see if it's truly helping people sell time, and those things compound into full-blown tooling suites that really kind of help a team over time do more and more things more effectively. So we try to be agile with it, and also I think self-service on the engineering side is also something that we flex into, because one, it's like it makes us more effective at building tools for other people, but also just like building that muscle of making our team more automated, and that definitely does, like that priority that can be within a single engineer. We're just like, hey, everyone, like, hey, this thing that we all hate, I just built a script for it in a couple hours and we're all good to go.
That's interesting. So there's some complementary aspects here of being self-serve and an agile approach to building out your tools, right? So you're not doing these like monolithic epics on, hey, like in 2 quarters we'll ship this like dashboard. It's engineer A saying, hey, I need to solve this problem. Let me just add a quick UI to it, and then maybe that evolves over time. That's all right.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. So maybe let's segue to like the development process of this. I'm curious about, at each of your companies, the history of internal tooling, right? Day one, you start with nothing. And over time, you run into issues, fires, maybe hopefully lesser fires. As from your experiences, right, what hasn't scaled well? What problems have you encountered? And maybe, on the bright side, what has scaled? Robert, maybe we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I think I'll start with the things that we did early on was basically just have a homegrown tool that use some open source type things that kind of generate UIs. But and the thing that worked well there was we could use a lot of the same stack. We could develop with the same team on this tool, and there were definitely kind of synergies there. But at the end of the day, the open source kind of internal tooling world you got to keep up to date with it, and it's not providing you any like secure infrastructure under the hood. It's just a front end. So that didn't particularly scale super well, and things like permissions and access controls are tricky to implement. And again, we'd much rather focus on our customers than build a fully permissioned internal tool. And so, I think and then the other thing is just scripts that you might have a run book in a Notion page, or have a couple scripts in your repo that do various things. But those end up evolving and becoming more complex and require a lot of start requiring institutional knowledge, that when you're just a few engineers, it's actually fine because everyone knows how that script works. But as you start to grow and onboard more team members, that institutional knowledge becomes a cost that's ways, if you can simplify, you'll get a lot of efficiency.
Interesting. And you mentioned as you grow in terms of headcount, right? I'm curious, when you say scaling, what are the axes that you think about? What are the dimensions that cause strain in your experience?
Yeah, pretty much every dimension imaginable. So headcount is one, customer size, and then product surface area, right? There's internal tooling that we need to serve different new lines of things that we're supporting for our customers too. So it grows at a polynomial rate of company growth, the things that you need to support.
They all just multiply together. And obviously, at Airplane, we're very honored and proud to have you guys as customers. When adopting something like Airplane, what was like the tipping point for you? Was it something where you woke up one day and you're like, oh shoot, we need to get a platform in place? Or was it like something that just got gradually worse and worse over time?
Yeah, it was one of those things where we saw that we needed to implement more security, and we saw that the scaling issues were popping up, and the tooling again just continued to require that institutional knowledge to support and to iterate on.
Yeah.
And it's not a these internal tools tend not to be the best UIs. They tend not to be world class user experiences, because you need to focus on bigger and better problems at the end of the day. So it was a gradual approach, and I think it was definitely heartening to find a tool like Airplane that thinks about things in the way that I would as an engineer if I were to think about, or just if I was going to go buy a product, that would replace something that we would have a lot of heartburn building internally. It definitely fit the bill.
Awesome. Abel, similarly, right? I'm curious about the history of internal tooling at ECG. Maybe way back in the beginning, right? What did the early days look like, and how has that evolved?
It was interesting in the fact that we had two separate teams, both of them about 20 some engineers per team. One engineer or one group was dedicated to internal tooling, and that's all they did. The other 20 were mostly focused on new developments. But as we started growing and scaling, and we scaled a lot faster than what we expected, we weren't able to keep up with new features and also with our legacy system, or at least the internal tooling. So we wanted to start pivoting some of the engineers on our internal tooling team so we can meet demand customers, because that's where our income was coming from. So we were looking for a tool that allowed us to automate it. And that's how we turned into Airplane. We wanted a tool that would allow us to automate a lot of the scripting that we had and be able to democratize the access to our tables. Because we don't want to access, or we don't want to give direct access to any of our tables, especially for our business side. Most of them don't do SQL or any queries. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to make it friendly enough for them and quick enough, so that way they can focus on what they needed and we can continue on with our development.
And you mentioned that in some sense, in some aspects, the team wasn't able to keep up in terms of the tooling, right, for the new products you're launching. What does that failure mode look like? Like, what are the incidents or maybe near incidents that happened as a result of that?
I think Robert touched on it. It was keeping up with the internal tooling itself, the libraries.
Right.
Eventually, we would release a tool from the internal side, and it would be good for probably a year or so. But then all of a sudden, you start getting bugs because there was library changes, etc. And so then I had to pull the original engineer that developed it back into that. And so then I slowed down in production on the front end. And so it made it super difficult being able to balance in between. And not only that, but if you have an engineer, or as an engineer, most of us like to focus on our project to try to finish it. And so if you pull them back and forth, then that makes it for a miserable life experience at work.
And you mentioned an internal tooling team, a very small team. Is that still existent today? How do you think about staffing around this?
Sure. We went from 20 engineers on that internal tooling to just 2 now.
Oh, wow.
So we were able to reduce it significantly.
What are those engineers now working on? More interesting things.
Actually, they do get some tickets here and there. They're just monitoring to make sure the tools are still working, or if they get reports that, hey, the tool didn't return what we expected, they'll troubleshoot it. But most of the time, they're working on our new development as well. So most of their day is about 2 hours on the internal tooling that we use with Airplane. The rest of it is usually on modern connections.
Well, I mean, that's a great segue into the next one, which is like, around the topic of Airplane, I am curious to, share with the audience, especially, 1 or 2 example use cases that Airplane has helped with, right? What are these concrete examples, and what are the ways that you've seen the biggest leverage out of a tool like Airplane?
Sure.
I can start off.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, I mean, there's two come to mind, which is like building like a data curation interface that just enabling kind of non-technical people to make edits, like you said, to tables that they shouldn't probably be writing SQL to do that. Another use case is enabling our data product team, who typically don't have front end experience, just to build some run books that that have a nice UI and is actually very easy to develop in. So the Airplane IDE developer console there is really helpful for folks who aren't typically writing front end code and debugging that, and being able to write things in Python in their more native language, to build a UI that themselves and other teams can use is really powerful for data workflows.
Right. And at a high level, what are these kinds of like run books or tools that a data team might be building?
Yeah, so it's things like it's data deployments, quality checks, things like that of that nature that we're building in to move data across environments, for example.
Interesting. Are these like automated workloads that you're doing, or is it a mixture?
It's a mixture. I think the airplane ones, we use data orchestration for the more automated ones. But for things where we want a human in the loop, or there's like input needed, those are the things where we're investing in tooling.
I see. Interesting. And so it sounds like it's both for technical teams, right? Like the data team, but also non-technical. How do you see that like grow or evolve over time?
Yeah, I think the note of an internal tooling team is a different philosophy that we have, which is we try to enable most engineers to kind of own the tooling for their specific use cases.
Right.
So I think though, in that autonomy, hopefully we can see more tools proliferate over time, so that when a team has their own kind of problem, they feel empowered to solve it, instead of passing that to a different backlog, for example.
Yeah. Interesting. And Abel, I'm curious about your team's usage, right, of Airplane. What would you say the top two use cases have been?
Sure. There's two that really do come to mind. The first one was our migration of our end subscribers from our legacy platform to our newer one. We had 15,000 subscribers to begin with that needed to be migrated within a weekend, essentially overnight, because we run 24/7, so we're collecting vitals all day, all night, and so we wanted an approach that allowed us to have engineers around the clock running, but they didn't have to be the original ones that started working with the APIs that were going to do the migration. And so allowing them to have a UI front end that they can trigger to be able to migrate them allowed us to do that. And so we were able to successfully complete that task in a weekend. Whereas and not only that, but we all took turns. Even our chief technology officer was online executing our code.
I see.
So it worked for us. The second one was a big money saver. So on the legacy platform, the way it was designed originally, it was for a personal emergency response system. So it has connections to our monitoring station. But eventually, some of the partners were doing non-PERS to be able to get reimbursed through the Medicaid program. And so we were paying for a PERS system to our partners to do the monitoring when they were non-PERS. And so that turns out to be about $600,000 a year that we were losing out on for a consumer that never used the system in that method. So allowing us to mitigate that was we used Airplane. Airplane allowed us to do what's called to do our cancellation tool that essentially looped through everything that we had. And we actually had customer service do it on our end, where they took the subscriber that was non-PERS, they entered your subscriber ID, and it executed the calls that it needed to do on the legacy system to cancel out that PERS. So it was able to allow us to do a lot of things without having the technical team having to be involved directly, other than the initial scripting.
And how does that initial like development work, right? Like which engineering team or sub team was involved, and how do they collaborate with support there?
Sure. So it was our app support team that was involved. So that's the two engineers that we currently have. And we were contacted by our CFO saying, hey, we're being billed incorrectly for these subscribers. They should be non-pers.
Yeah.
And so from there, we started doing our due diligence, figuring out what happened. And we kind of knew it was because of the legacy system. And so we worked with our business development team to coordinate to make sure they're not supposed to be they're supposed to be non-person because there was no way to differentiate them in the past in the legacy
Yeah.
system. So it was a lot of going back and forth before we implemented a couple of lines of code, and then
Right.
the installations went through.
And it sounds like, that engineering context is actually very important there, right? It's not something that you could or would want a support person just to build on their own in that case.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Specifically because of the data that they're accessing at the end of the day. Because again, we try to segregate, we do least privileged internally. And a lot of these teams don't have to have access to the consumer information that we get to see, vital, so forth, because that's not part of the day-to-day for them.
Right.
So Airplane allowed us to do that, to actually give them the access they needed to execute the job.
Right. Very cool. It's always awesome to see that, customers and what they build. And it always ends up being more impressive than what we've imagined or have done ourselves. So kudos to you guys. Maybe on a more forward-looking note, I'm curious how you see this evolving, right? As you, to the best of your ability, project how the business evolves, right? In terms of customers or headcount or just product lines. How do your tools scale with you over the next few years, right? And what are the biggest trends you're seeing? Like, is it more of the same, or do you think it fundamentally looks different 5 years from now? Curious if anyone, maybe Robert, we'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah. So like I mentioned, I think like self-service, I think the ease of use that we're seeing and empowering teams. I think one thing I'd be excited to see is our kind of not formal software engineers, but folks with semi-technical background. So say on our kind of professional services and implementation organizations who are writing SQL code and might know a little bit of Python, letting them self-serve in some ways or debug is really interesting. Whereas for sensitive internal tools, those can be risky things that you might put engineering into place for. So that's exciting. I think the AI, the autopilot function is very exciting also in that realm, where you just, like, no one has to write code. You kind of just can pump out have it try to build it for you. That's really exciting as well. And I think, that's building more interfaces for our teams and more automation just in general. And that's what we do as a business anyways, which is helping our customers automate and use software to do their jobs better. So it's definitely inspiring for us to self-serve in that way too.
Awesome. Abel, do you agree, disagree? Anything different?
No, I agree with that. I know that the AI apps on the side, it will be a benefit because we won't have to have a technical individual or an engineer working on them at all times. So it allows them, because you can just essentially tell them what you're looking for and you get an end product, which is pretty neat. On our end for internal tooling, we will continue to scale because again, our user base is growing and each one has a different case. So every single time that we onboard a new organization, they're always going to have a different need for us, a different report, and there's always going to be a need for internal tooling to be able to create that for them.
Right.
So being able to give a non-technical individual access and training on how to run the scripts is probably going to be used for a while with ECG while we continue to develop our proprietary software.
So if AI is building more of these tools, right? Is there a concern that, this is production that it's touching? Like, obviously the goal is not to let an AI agent just run amok on its own, but how do you think about that balance, right? How does that work in practice?
So I think that at the end of the day, you'll always have someone to oversee it.
Yeah.
That would be, for example, our engineering support. They'll review the tool, make sure everything's working as is, and that there's limited access that it should have. So there's always going to be someone that needs to validate.
I see. So I guess it's not different from any other engineer on the team, right? There's a review process and there's as needed access. And so it's not just carte blanche.
Yeah,
Robert,
because if not, we'd probably be in trouble by so many organizations. So yeah.
yeah. Robert, I see you nodding. Anything else around that? Like how do you responsibly use AI to build here?
Yeah, I mean it's hyper advanced autocomplete. So yeah, to your
Yeah.
point, still going through review, but I mean we're also using GitHub Copilot as well for engineers who want to leverage that. They're welcome to, but still
Right.
gonna have to follow the same processes.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. That's interesting. Cool. Well, that marks the end of the discussion portion. Thank you, Abel. Thank you, Robert, for some really interesting data points and learnings here. I do want to open this up to Q&A for folks in the audience. So someone asked, how are your organizations thinking about balancing security concerns and the use of AI, LLMs, et cetera? Great question. And so, I believe, referring to use a lot of the cases when you're working with AI, an LLM, right? The one you're sometimes sending it to an external data provider or a model provider. And in other cases, right, you're asking it to make potentially automated judgment and decisions on it. And in a third case, I would add also, from what I've seen, you might sometimes give it sensitive context and not expect it to dump out all that context. And so there's a lot of more, so how do you balance that, especially in your space? And, I will just, disclaimer for the folks here, like a lot of this is early days and people are still figuring it out. But yeah, I'm curious what you guys have found out so far. Maybe Robert.
Yeah, and the things you highlighted are exactly that. There's the concern of using an LLM to even scoop up internal documentation and build a chatbot for your team. Tons of businesses trying to solve that problem, but again, like there's private information in any business that's sensitive, even for the least sensitive of companies. There's going to be sensitive information at the company, so that will require a great deal of care. And to my eye, like you can't just tell the AI not to do that, not to release private information. It's probably something outside of our capability at the very least. And the other point, is just like access to systems, read only. Don't go writing, let it write things. For example, if you're writing an agent that's querying things, and I think those are the main ones.
Abel, what are your thoughts?
Limiting the scope of the access that it's going to have would definitely be a thing. So what you're going to give it to ingest is how we're limiting a lot of the things. Also on our end is making sure that we validate every single process as it's going through before we release it, and try to use as much testing as possible. Doesn't guarantee anything that it's going to be perfect. But we're trying our best to make sure that we mitigate any security leaks that we might encounter. So
and the other point you added, Josh, which is sending to a third party as well, which is so self-hosting an LLM is absolutely pretty much critical once you're beyond the MVP stage. In many cases.
Is that what you guys are doing these days? What are the self-hosting approaches that you'd likely pursue?
Yeah, we're experimenting with different vendors, like our cloud provider, open source, like looking at Llama, things like that. But I think again, to your point, that it's moving so fast that sometimes you just got to pick something and go with it, but it's always up for review.
Abel, are you guys running any models on device, or is it all in the cloud?
It's all in the cloud currently. There was a device that we were using previously, temporarily. It never made it out to market, but we discontinued it. Again, complications on the models, and it was basically the user side. It was the latency between. So IoT has helped a lot, but that was before IoT days. So we stopped it 2 years ago.
Good. Cool. Well, Thank you for that question. I think we have time for maybe one more. We have a question for Robert and Abel. How has AI improved your team's efficiency so far, if it has at all in your day to work? So I guess, Robert, you mentioned Copilot, right? Like, are you seeing dramatic changes? Or what's the trend line been?
That's a good question. I mean, look, developer efficiency is notoriously difficult to measure in the first place. So I think what I'm focused most on is like that happiness quotient and
Yep.
empowering developers to use any tools at their disposal. So not getting into the details on how much code they're writing and how many pull requests they submit. Those can be unproductive sometimes, but really focused on the people who want to use it and are effective using it. Go for it.
Yeah. Is it mostly around developers or non-engineers using AI more as well?
Oh yeah, I mean our whole team's using it for various use cases, but for writing code, that's Copilot. But I mean our marketing, it's fantastic for marketing, for sales, for
Right.
copywriting, all that jazz.
Interesting. Abel, how about your org? Has it been pretty widespread, or is it dipping your toes in?
It's been widespread internally within our development group itself. I haven't seen it being used internally within our business development or other groups within ECG, but it has helped us with code itself. Essentially, whenever we find a blocker that our engineers can't figure out,
Yep.
they'll use AI to see if they have a solution for it, which has helped in the
Interesting.
past. Sometimes it throws them into another loop, but it has helped at least.
Yeah. Super interesting. Well, awesome, folks. This is about all the time we have today. And so we can wrap here. Abel, Robert, thank you guys so much for taking the time. I've learned a lot, and hopefully, the audience has as well. I wish you all the best of luck in your operational efficiency adventures, and also just in building incredible businesses here. So thank you, and hopefully we'll chat again.